So thank you very much for inviting me to the school this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I was saying to the Hidi, is that what I can call you? No? When I come in, you can usually tell when you go into a business whether it's a good business or not, just the way you come in, the way you're welcomed. And I've got a very warm welcome here, so thank you very much for inviting me up. What I want to do this afternoon is talk about a couple of things that are on my mind, but more importantly, I want to get to what's on your mind. So the question and answer is something that I really want to get into, because then you can ask me anything that you want to ask me, and then that's what's on your mind and not particularly what's on mine. But I suppose the main thing I want to talk about is never in my wildest dreams would I have expected to be standing here in a school in Glasgow talking about some of the things that have happened to me, you know, because I suppose similar to you guys, I just went to a normal school back in Ayrshire in a wee place called New Cumnock. Has anybody heard of New Cumnock? Few? Yeah, so not any different to this. And it takes me back, I don't know if any of you followed the US presidential elections with Barack Obama, which was quite a historic thing, regardless of your politics. It was a historic thing that an African American got into the White House. And during the campaigning for the US presidential election, there was a senator from Massachusetts, a Republican senator called Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney will probably run for president this time as well against Barack Obama. But Mitt Romney was one of these guys, he actually looked like a president. He was 6'2", full head of hair, pretty suave looking character, and he carried himself well. And he was standing, I'm sure you've all saw it on the telly, these big gatherings where they're in an auditorium and all the ticker tapes coming down. And he was obviously loving being up on stage there, and he was standing, and his beautiful wife was just down here. She was 6 foot in her stocking soles, blonde, and he was standing up there taking in this whole thing that was going on around him. And he looked down at his wife and he said, "Honey, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think I'd be standing here running for president of the United States of America?" And she just looked up and said, "Honey, you were never in my wildest dreams." So I think the first lesson is not to take yourself too seriously. Whether you're meeting presidents or kings or heads of state or whatever, and that's a true story, and I actually did tell that story with President Clinton one time, and I actually stole the show from him, which was not bad for a wee boy from Newcomer. So, how many of you have heard of Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs, yeah? Few, right. So Steve Jobs, inventor of the Macintosh computer, iPhones, iPads, iTunes. Many of you have heard of iTunes. Right, okay. So, have you got access to the internet in this great school? Absolutely. Right, so you've got to go into YouTube. Have any of you did this and looked at Steve Jobs' commencement speech, Stanford University? Right, so you've got to do it. Okay, it runs for about 15 minutes, 2005, and this was Steve Jobs, a wee bit like this, except I'm no Steve Jobs, and this is the Stanford. He gets invited along to do a speech to the students who are graduating from Stanford University, one of the best universities in America. And I'm not going to spoil it because he says it a lot better than me, but this was given to me because I've got kids around about your age that I'm trying to influence and see what they want to do in life. And just watching this is amazing. But a couple of things from this. One, he was adopted, which some of you may find, you know, because everybody thinks, oh, if only I could have a better start in life, if only if this wasn't happening, if only if that wasn't happening. Well, Steve Jobs was adopted, first of all, and his adopted parents wanted to put him through college, but unlike Scotland, where we do have free university education, in America you've got to pay for it, you've got to pay through the nose for it. So his parents were really toiling to give him a college education, and that didn't sit comfortably with him. So he decided to drop out So he never got a university degree or college diploma. But he still went along. So he was a drop-in. So he just didn't pay, basically. So he's a bit of a chancer, you might say. And Steve Jobs dropped in to his college. But what he said was that was a great opportunity for him because he dropped in things that he wanted to see, and he slept on his pal's floor in the dormitory. So, he didn't have a great start in life. But one of the classes he went to was calligraphy. You know what calligraphy is? Yeah. So, and at that point he said, how could I ever know about calligraphy? How could I ever know that was even going to figure in my life? And what he says was, you can't join up the dots looking forward, only when you're looking back. And what that means to me is, don't try and work everything out from here to say, right, here it is, and here's what I've got to do. You can only look at that backwards. Like I think, Neve, you were saying, this course you've been on, you really enjoyed it, and you think it's going to stand you in good stead, which is great. You don't know where it's going to take you, but you've enjoyed it. And that's what it's all about. So he said it wasn't the 10 years later when he had founded Macintosh, and he said if he hadn't dropped into this calligraphy class, the beautiful typography which is in the Mac, which is what sets it apart, its design, the typography of how it's all put together, it all came back to him 10 years later when he was designing this. And if he hadn't dropped in this class, therefore that might not have happened. Another thing happened to him. 30 years old, he founded Macintosh Computers, but he was sacked. They brought in a new chief exec, he was the founder, and he got the bullet. And he thought at 30 years old, that was it was all over. He thought, I'm a disgrace, I'm a failure, what am I going to do? And he built this business to about $2 billion in turnover. Only in America could this happen, but they don't think that's good enough. But he said that once he had kind of thought about his position, where he was, what he was going to do about it, it freed his mind, and he went and he started Pixar. Anybody heard of Pixar? Pixar, the most successful animation studio in the world, Toy Story, all the rest of it. So he fit, as well as the Apple, Mac, iTunes, he did Pixar as well in his spare time. And he also started up another technology company called Next, who Apple ended up buying. So he was back in to Apple as the chief exec, and at that point he then came up with iTunes, iPads, iPods, all the rest of it. So have a look at this, because his life, we would all think, goodness, the guy who invented the iPod or the iPhone must be some character. He's no different from you. That's what I'm here to tell you today. He's no different from you guys. And you've got to try and believe that. He didn't have probably as good a start in life as you've got. He didn't get the education which you'll now get. And you might think, no, I could never do that. But I'm telling you, you can.